Hello guys, Dominic again here with another video. Today I'm going to be attempting to answer probably the most important question. What is God and what is our place? And it is of course something that a lot of people have pondered. And I'm going to try to stay focused on mainly on what is God in relation to us as human beings here on the earth. And I think that Gandhi said it best, or said it really well at least. You say what you want about Gandhi. When he's right, and he's definitely right here. He says, God is not a person, God is an eternal principle. So, a lot of people, they think of God as a person. They have this image in their mind typically of God as a man in the sky. And I'm fairly certain that this comes out of Mesopotamian mythology, typically associated with gods like Anu and Enlil. This is not an accurate image of God that people should have in their mind. And it's actually very limiting to what God actually is, because God is not limited by gender, and it actually limits the self as well, because God lives within each individual. And because people have this limiting view of what God is, they have a limiting view of themselves as well. So, I'm going to break down the etymology of the word principle, as well as give my own definition. So, the word principle comes from Latin, and the first word that it's associated with is principium, which means origin, source, or beginning. And later it was broken down into the words princeps or principia. The word princeps means first or chief, and the word principia means foundation. So the word principle basically means what comes first and are the defining characteristics of our very being. These are codes or rules individuals form based on their own self-reflection that acts as a source for an individual's behavior after the process of self-reflection. So essentially, principles are the source from which authentic action flows. So when it comes to an individual developing their principles or morals, there are four stages uh, referred to typically as a child develops over the course of their lifestyle. The first stage is referred to as the amoral stage, and these are babies who cannot self reflect on their actions, cannot understand the consequences of their actions, and basically their whole lives revolve around other people doing things for them because they don't actually know what they're doing at all. They can't even understand basic punishment or rewards. The next phase would be the pre-operational phase, which is basically now you understand punishments and rewards, and this is what guides your morality. Basically, if you do something and if your parents punish you, you associate that with good or bad, but you can't really go beyond this. And then the third stage, the operational stage, is now it's beyond your parents. Now you understand what society expects of you, or school expects from you, or your work expects from you, or whatever. And then beyond that is looking back at your life, self reflecting on what you know and your own personal experiences, and deciding for yourself uh, what is good and what is bad based on analyzing the consequences of your own actions and how they've impacted your life. So a child is essentially incapable of forming principles until they are later an adult. They'll say that this ends when you are 25, but I would say that it varies from individual to individual. Some are quicker, some are faster, and many never even make it there, as there's studies that support that most people never come to the post-operational stage, meaning that they never actually form principles on themselves. They're just acting based on what others expect of them. And when you're acting in this sort of way, you are essentially putting a barrier between yourself and God, because you're not coming, or you're not choosing rather, to form your own principles. Instead, you're letting other people define them for you. And this is not what God wants from us, because it interferes with our growth as an eternal soul. So you can look at these images here on the left or on the right. The child is looking in the mirror and contemplating what type of man or adult that they're going to grow into be. And right under him, you have the man looking back and reflecting on what he was like as a child. So essentially, the process of self-reflection never really ends, right? Because as a kid, we're always wondering and imagining who we're going to grow into. And as an adult, often we look back on our times as a child. And if we do that productively, we can come to form principles that are going to benefit us and others around us, because we recognize what we've done and what kind of consequences our actions have generated for ourselves and others. Above all things, God is principled. This means the way God is now is the way God will always be, and the way God has always been. Through a journey of constant self-discovery and eternal evolution of consciousness, there are certain principles that God never deviates from to ensure the journey of consciousness is flowing the way it needs to. In our universe, these principles manifest in the form of cause and effect, as all our actions generate consequences that are outside our control. Now, consequences are outside our control, but our actions are not. And while we can't know exactly the consequences that our actions will generate, we can definitely develop the wisdom and understanding to have the foresight to know how our, or what type of effects might be generated from our actions. This is why it's important for individuals to develop principles, because from these, individuals disengage from harmful behavior and even stop harmful behavior from occurring in the first place. When people engage in and support harmful behaviors, they are actively waging war with the evolution of consciousness itself, because they are restricting other individuals' actions and free will, the driving force for new experiences. So it's actually new experiences that are the driving force for the evolution of consciousness. Novelty is essentially the driving force for the evolution of consciousness. And God's principles essentially ensure that the most fair and deserved outcome is the outcome that manifests based on our actions. And this outcome manifests through the consequences of our actions, the thing outside of our control. And free will, people gotta know that the universe is both deterministic and random. There are both components in the universe. The deterministic component is God's principles that ensure consciousness is rewarded the way it should be, based on the way consciousness chooses to interact in its external environment. And the random component is free will. Free will is just basically the ability for us as intelligent beings. We basically have three options. Number one, we can choose to come into alignment with God's principles and live in harmony with them and reap the benefits that would generate. Number two is we could come to reject God's principles, willfully reject God's principles, and from that, negative consequences would undoubtedly come. And the third option would be to just remain ignorant of God's principles and let other people guide your worldviews for you, and through guiding your worldviews, essentially guide your actions. So these are the three choices we have in regards to free will. And ignorance also generates its own consequences. So God's principles, they're not here to just punish us and make our lives harder. They're not here to just reward us and make our lives easier. They are here to make sure that we are deservingly rewarded for our actions based on the types of behaviors that we support or don't support. So, what are God's principles actually? God's principles are generation and evolution. Generation is God's act of bringing new life into existence, and evolution is the continuous journey for life to grow, develop, and ultimately become a version of itself closer to God. Because of these principles, it is best to think of God as a loving and patient mother who wants what is best for their children. And I know I said earlier that thinking of God as a person is limiting, and it is true that even calling God a loving and patient mother is limiting to what God actually is. However, we are limited when it comes to describing God because our brains just cannot comprehend properly eternity. So, when it comes to describing God, it is, again, best to think of God as a loving and patient mother, because you're never going to actually fall out of God's love. God's never going to get jealous of you. God's never going to get angry or vengeful with you in a way that is going to, where he's going to essentially condemn your soul for eternity. This is just not what God is. So again, while it might be a bit contradictory of me to say that God is a mother in light of what I said in the beginning, again, it's not actually possible for anyone to explain exactly what God is. Through this process, we as living beings help God learn itself by having experiences that have never happened before. Free will is the force that propels the evolution of consciousness, because since each individual is unique, each individual will contribute experiences that have never happened before and will never happen again. So you can think of your neighbor, for example. You might live similar lives, but there's slight deviations or differences in your life. And ultimately, the accumulation of these experiences contributes to a different life between you and your neighbor. So, for example, You might work the same amount of hours, but you might work a different job. Or you might not like the same books or movies. These sorts of things. And it's these unique qualities that help evolution grow and evolve, or consciousness evolve and grow. And you can even think of different time periods. You know, the way people live today is not the way people lived 100 years ago, or even 1,000 years ago, and even 1,000 years before that. Life is continuously changing. Even though many things stay the same, the experiences are new, and each individual contributes new and different experiences. When people are tapped into their authentic self, the chances for novel experiences driven by love and curiosity go up, as opposed to if individuals were not living an authentic lifestyle because they are too focused on trying to conform to society. Okay, so God does not want stagnancy. God does not want robots who God can program and they're going to do exactly what God programmed them to do. Because this is not what brings about growth. What God actually wants from us is God wants equals. God wants to be able to hold us to our soul to itself and say, wow, I see myself in this soul. There's no deviations from myself and this soul. This person truly understands, or this soul truly understands, what it means to live within my principles. And this is what God really wants from us. God wants us to be on its level. It doesn't want us to be, in confusion, in a state of fear, in a state of worship, because when people are in this state, consciousness is not flowing the way it should be, because people are not tapped into their authentic self. And because people are not tapped into their authentic self, but rather they're tapped into a self that's been self-imposed upon them from others, they're essentially committing a form of idolatry. And this is what the word idolatry means. It means to be idle and fixated on one thing or one tree, and essentially missing the forest from that one tree. You can't come out of this way of thinking, regardless of if it's right or if it's wrong, to consider other ways of thinking that may help you tap into your authentic self, because your identity is so attached to what others have imposed upon you. Okay? And again, from this stagnancy, consciousness is not progressing in a fluid manner. It's progressing. You could even argue maybe it's not progressing. You know, it's like a lake instead of a river, or a dammed up river. And I chose this picture here on the right. The woman represents God, and the plant represents us, and it represents the universe. Now, when most people grow plants, they generally want their plant to grow into the best and healthiest and strongest version of itself. And this is exactly what God wants from us. God wants us to grow into essentially individuals who are unwavering in their principles, because from that unwavering determination, we can actually bring about essentially heaven on earth, because that level of determination that we need to have for our principles is the determination that God has for its principles and the level that it takes of how seriously it takes its principles, in the sense that God will never deviate from its principles. This is what it means to be perfect, essentially. So here's a quote from an American poet, Helen Steiner Rice, and it says, "A mother's love is patient and forgiving when all others are forsaking. It never fails or falters, even though the heart is breaking." So basically, no matter how far you fall out of God's grace or how far you think out of God's grace, you will never actually fall out of God's love, because God is pretty much eternally patient and wants what is best for all its children, and is willing, as long as we want to, God will always be willing to come to our assistance, just as long as we're willing to reflect upon ourselves and try to align our principles with that of God's. And another thing, it is possible to disconnect from source because an individual has just transgressed so hard. However, most people will likely never reach that state. And even for the individuals who have reached that state, who they've transgressed so hard they've actually disconnected themselves from God or from source, God still loves them because God still remembers what they once were. And there's always potential, even then, to come back. So what is our role as humans on the earth? Humanity's role is essentially to act as caretakers. Since we are the most intelligent species, that is, we are the only species who can manifest our imagination in a limitless number of ways, we have the highest levels of responsibilities of any life form on the earth. So what do I mean by that? Human beings are the only living thing on the planet that can manipulate matter to be exactly what they want it to be. While it's true that some animals, like birds, they can make nests, beavers, they can make dams, they cannot do it on the level a human can. A human can make a dam out of stone. They can make a dam out of wood. They can make a dam out of metal. They can make a dam out of a combination of several materials. A beaver is pretty much limited to the stuff it's going to find on the ground, and it can't really manipulate those materials beyond gnawing on it and holding them in its little hands and placing them. Same with the bird. The things that a human can do with these things is just beyond them. And you can even take, like even more intelligent animals like whales and dolphins, for examples. There are no whale cities, or there are no dolphin cities. And they don't have the ability to create tools. They don't have the ability to create machinery that allows them to go on land. Humans can create boats and go into a whale's habitat. They can't do that. And this is what separates us. Another thing that separates us is our language. While animals, they have various and limited forms of communication, and the level of complexity of that communication varies from species to species. None of them are on the level that a human is, where we have like literally thousands of words to describe the external world around us. Animals are not capable of this contemplation, nor are they capable of this level of communication. Another way you can think of it is, again, with whales, and I'm bringing up whales a lot because they're often seen as one of the smartest animals on the planet. There's never, at least as far as I'm aware, in recorded history, has there ever been an oil spill because of a whale or a dolphin. Because they don't understand that you can take resources from the earth, like oil, and use it to empower other material things that you manipulated, like a car. They don't have any use for oil. And this is what separates humans from animals, is we can do things the animals can't. We can think in complex ways that animals just simply cannot. So because of this gift, we are the most mature species and the closest to God. And we are the only ones capable of contemplating principles. Animals' principles, they're pretty much just limited to their instincts for the most part. As humans, it is our principles or lack thereof that shape the world around us and bring us closer into harmony with nature, God, and each other. If we fail to align our principles with that of God, then we will deservingly generate negative consequences in the world, not just for ourselves as humans, but for all living things on the earth. And again, you can think of the oil spill example. As far as I'm aware, animals have never been responsible for any sort of environmental hazard on the level of like the BP oil spill from like 2011 or 12. Because of our level of intelligence, and because we are the only beings capable of contemplating and forming principles, we are the closest beings to God on this planet. And that means that if we want to bring about changes on this planet, we have to want it. Because if we don't want it, essentially God doesn't want it. Remember what I was saying, God lives through us. God manifests its imagination through us here. And if we can't imagine a better existence for ourselves, or if we can't want a better world for ourselves, God will not imagine a better world for us, nor will God even want a better world for us. Because how can God possibly, or anyone or anything possibly, help beings who don't even want to help themselves? And this is why it's important, again, to form principles, because from forming principles, people can disengage from harmful behavior, and we could actually probably form a world that looks more like the one in the image than the world we actually have. And in fact, I would say that what we see in the image is possible now. We could do this now. I was watching a video recently of a guy who was taming snapping turtles. And he was petting them, and he even had them on his lap. You know, snapping turtles, if you don't know, they're pretty notorious for biting off fingers or toes, or if you have them on your lap and you're a male, they might bite something else off. And this guy showed that animals with a fierce reputation, they can be tamed, and we can coexist peacefully together, accepting the animals for what they are and accepting ourselves for what we are. And just because we are more intelligent than the animals, that does not make our lives more valuable than the animals. Because again, everyone and everything contributes to the evolution of consciousness in their own way. Animals are having their own unique experiences, and they need to be free to do them, or at least they should be, just like human beings. So just because, again, we're more intelligent, we're not more important. We are just more responsible for the conditions that this planet is in, because essentially we put them in place. And another thing too, just look at the etymology of animal. The word animal essentially means animated spirit, or having the breath of life, which spirit means breath. So really, they're not much different from us. You know, we are also animated spirits. We're just on a different level than they are. And again, that's okay, because for evolution to, or for consciousness to evolve properly, again, there needs to be novel experience. So here's another quote here by Michael Jackson. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make a change. From the song Man in the Mirror. I was going to use the Gandhi quote, be the change you want to see in the world, but a lot of people will say that he didn't actually say that. But this comes from generally his philosophy. And it is definitely a powerful message, because again, if we want to bring about godly changes in this world and be closer to the principles of God that will actually generate beneficial consequences for everyone, including the animals, including your loved ones, then we need to actually take a look at ourselves, because God's creative and transformative energies flow through us. So how do we actually come into alignment with God's principles, or what do we actually even look for within ourselves? And again, it's different for each person, because each individual is a unique expression of consciousness. But by aligning our thoughts, emotions, and actions, people can stop being guided by external forces and work to silence themselves and hear the quiet voice of God within themselves. So a lot of people, they're in a state of conflict. They think one thing, they feel another thing, and then they go and act in a way that is completely antithetical to the way they're thinking or feeling. And this creates a person who is going to essentially, they're going to have a lot of pent-up tension. They may even have some anger. They may even have some depression. And they may even have fear within them. And essentially, they're not going to be manifesting the best possible life for themselves. So this is a difficult process for most, to silence themselves. But this would absolutely bring about world-changing effects if enough people accomplished it. After ending the conflict within oneself, can people come to form principles that are in alignment with God's eternal and perfect principles? When this happens, the consequences so many think they deserve will finally manifest, rather than the ones they actually deserve. So, as it is now, most people, they support violence. They are not in alignment with God's principles, and if you go back to the earlier part of the video, they're like in the third stage of development, the conventional stage. Essentially, they're just going through life based on what society expects out of them. And by doing this, you're stagnating your own consciousness in the micro scale. And when enough people are in this form of thinking and way of doing things, you're stagnating consciousness in the macro scale for all of humanity. So again, by coming and forming principles that are not in conflict with yourself and not in conflict with nature, we can actually manifest a more just world. Another thing as well, guys, if you didn't get it from this presentation, I'll hammer it in at the end. Everything and everyone is connected to Source. Source is basically just God. It's another word for God. And by coming into alignment with this Source, we can actually work to manifest uh, a freer world for all, where freedom is actually happening instead of just something that people want to be happening. So that's my attempt to answer what God is, and um, to explain our role within God's realm and within this realm here. And I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys again.